All right, I think we're just about 4 o'clock, Taylor. Is that right? We will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Thursday webinar. And before we introduce our distinguished speaker today, let's just go ahead and do our introductory slides. Oops. This one there. As always, we acknowledge the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Dene, and Jicarilla Apache people on whose traditional homelands our campus sits. Our mission-related work is not possible without Indigenous people in the past, present, and future, and we respectfully recognize and honor ancestral and descendant Indigenous communities for their contributions to all humankind. We are truly grateful to all Indigenous people, our Indigenous partners, communities, and we support the preservation and protection of cultural traditions, ancestral connections, and sacred lands. Thank you to all of our partners. As usual with the Zoom, please try to put your questions in the Q&A instead of the chat. People get excited in the chat and sometimes we miss the questions. And if we can see how many questions are accumulating, we'll know whether or not to ask our speaker to give the extended hot mix version of his talk or to stop and entertain questions. So please do put those in the Q&A. We're live streaming on Facebook if Zoom gives you a headache, and this will be available on YouTube after the fact. We have a really cool webinar coming up next week. The conceptualizing the past, the thoughtful engagement of hearts and minds. This is really about the history and future of experiential education at Crow Canyon. And Dr. Elaine Franklin, who ran our education program for a long time, is going to talk about how she created our experiential education programs. And we have a new Pueblo educator, John Gahate, who is going to talk about his hopes for the future of our education programs. So please do tune in. It should be really spectacular. Just another big thank you. We had, nearly 200 people at our 40th anniversary conference. Taylor and I were just talking about, it feels like it was last week, but it was actually 2 weeks ago, but it was just amazing. We're still contemplating all of the relationships we built and the incredible conversations and things that we learned. And we really can't do any of this without you. We are almost entirely supported by your generosity. So without further ado, we are so excited to have our friend and colleague, Dr. Mike Adler, coming to talk to us this week. He received his PhD in anthropology from University of Michigan Museum of Anthropology. He is presently the chair of the Department of Anthropology at Southern Methodist University and has decades of experience in the education field as a professor and a lecturer in the anthropological field. Just this year, he's published an article called Multi-Sensor Drone Survey of Ancestral Agricultural Landscapes at Picuris Pueblo in the Journal of Archaeological Science. And even more impressive, he has a chapter in the recent Crow Canyon volume, Research, Education, and American Indian Partnerships at Crow Canyon Archaeological Center. So thank you so much for joining us and for telling us about your recent work.
Glad to do it.
Oops, stop sharing.
All right. Is that coming through?
Yep, looks perfect.
Good. Well, I want to thank everyone at Crow Canyon for starting my archaeological career. The 40th anniversary of Crow Canyon is also my 40th anniversary of my marriage to Jeannie Athos Adler, who came to Crow Canyon with me in 1983 and served as the housekeeper for a bunch of archaeologists. So if that's not resilience, I don't know what is. So a bit of advice: never take your new bride on an archaeological dig.
Marriage killers. Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yes, we were housed in the room between the boys and girls dorm in bunk beds, and Jeannie only cried for 3 nights. So
well, you're still together. I'm so glad.
So this is a bit of a thought bubble, this talk. I've been, as you'll see, working with colleagues in Picuris Pueblo for many years, and have been putting together some ideas about the very long history and some of the ideas that archaeologists bring to bear to try and understand occupations, resilience, collapse, those sorts of things that we always try and explain. I want to start by thanking my co-PIs, Sev Fowles and Lindsay Montgomery. Sev is a professor at Columbia University Barnard College. Lindsay is at the University of Toronto. These two powerhouses have put up with me for the past 3 years on this NSF project and are absolutely wonderful colleagues. What you'll be seeing here today is all co-produced work. There's nothing you're going to see that they haven't had their hands on and their thoughts in. And I want to thank them for that. Also, Mr. Richard Bermejo. Richard is our guide in so many ways at Picuris Pueblo. He's our tribal liaison. He's part of the NSF project. He is a tribal elder and a very respected part of the Pueblo there, a past governor. And again, we couldn't have had a better guide. And so thank you, all of you. I also want to thank the Picuris community, and in particular, the Picuris governor there in the center, Craig Quincello, and the Picuris Tribal Council. Even during the COVID lockdown, the community provided us access to their lands and their resources, and also a level of trust that is humbling, given the epidemics and pandemics and traumas that this community has weathered these past 500 years. So thank you all. What I hope to do today is talk a little bit about resilience theory. This is, like most of the things we do in archaeology, a borrowed theory from ecology and biology. And it has been applied in various ways over the past couple decades in archaeology. And so I want to look into how it's been applied and some of the pros and cons that go with that. Resilience really is an emergent possible condition. It's not something, it's not a goal. This is not goal-driven behavior in forests or societies. This is just a description of a possible condition of a system. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about what does resilience measure? And given the challenges of applying this borrowed concept, are there offshoots of this that can help us? And I would argue that one is what I call transilience, which is a set of the acts and practices of how people face and faced upheaval, trauma, and change, things that can challenge their systems and long-term resilience. And to do that, I'll be talking about the Northern Rio peoples and whether this term resilience really has use. And if so, how and by what means have they been resilient? And then in particular, transilient strategies contending with the challenges of change. This is really what I think we in archaeology, especially with the astounding archaeological record that we are privileged with in the Southwest, this is something that I think we can get quite a bit of traction on. So the elevator pitch for resilience theory, like the processes of biological evolution, resilience isn't something really a goal, unless you're a policy person and you are looking for economic or environmental resilience. But as a description of self-organizing systems, it's a possible emergent condition of a system. So it's been variously defined, first in ecology as the capacity of an adaptive system to undergo change while maintaining its fundamental functions, processes, and structures. In other words, it's not going to fall apart in the face of perturbations. Or Brad Moeller and all have described it as the ability of the system to remain close to equilibrium after disturbance. And what I'm really interested in this diagram here is right here, disturbance. This is where people who model resilience and resilient systems oftentimes simply say something happened. And after something happened, this is how systemically it was dealt with or not dealt with. This, I think, is where archaeology has some traction in being able to say what happened and what did people do during and after that disturbance. Now, I've often wondered whether resilience theory is just the 1970s general systems theory with much simpler drawings. Here you have on the left, a classic general systems theory graphic of how things were interacting in adaptive systems. And of course, on the right, the for loop, back loop of how resilient adaptive systems are modeled. Those of you who were in grad school last century, when I was, probably still have nightmares about general systems theory. Hopefully you still don't wake up screaming. It's either that or clowns with me. Archaeology and resilience. So when we're trying to talk about resilience and resilient strategies, resilient systems, one of the challenges we have is what are we measuring? What sort of thing are we trying to understand its dynamics to see whether it is actually able to withstand these disturbances, perturbations, traumas systemically and continue on with its functionality? And very challenging, obviously, for archaeologists all the time. What are the appropriate temporal and spatial and organizational scales? Are we looking at a community as resilient? Are we looking at a society? Are we looking at a kingdom? And over what time period? Again, we in the Southwest have astounding temporal record and also preservation. So I think, again, this is one of those areas where we can truly try and apply some of these concepts. Some of the benefits that have come out of resilience in archaeology studies, Chuck Redman has written very extensively about this and lauded the fact that resilience theory and resilience thinking requires multidisciplinary studies, and something that we always benefit from in archaeology. Brad Muller et al. Also point out that the concept of adaptive cycles is useful defining for what we're measuring. And Peoples et al. In a great study of agrarian systems and settlement in Arizona did a great job of exploring the relationships of social and natural capital, basically what people are investing in and what has been invested in the past as measures of resilience. For a really great critique of archaeological approaches to resilience, read Elnaz Rashidian's very short article where he really clearly lays out some of the challenges of using this concept in archaeology. And so, as I mentioned, some of our challenges are that first, resilience has this very positive connotation. If you're a resilient person, a resilient system, a resilient community, it means things are working, that you're adaptively functional. This can be a difficult thing to overcome when one is simply trying to understand past human behaviors and challenges. If the goal is to prove that resilience occurred and that people were resilient, we have to obviously check ourselves on that. Another real challenge is so much of what has been modeled, especially in ecology, regarding resilience, has modeled external change, external effects as being the disturbance. And we are all well aware, almost on a daily basis, that many of the challenges in our systems, social, economic, ritual, are oftentimes internal. So how do we model those? And then again, as I mentioned before, there's systemic changes at different scales of organizations. Some result in systemic change and some don't. So I've broken the cardinal rule by starting with theory with this talk. Please, again, give me some grace on that, because now we're going to talk about the actual archaeological work that we have been involved in the Northern Rio Grande. I'll be talking about this very, very special place and very special community, Picuris Pueblo, the smallest population-wise of all of the Rio Grande Pueblos, a tribal roll of around 300 to 400 people, with, I would argue, the longest record of occupation in a single place of any community in the Southwest, if not North America. Temporal integrity, community integrity lasting the past 1100 years or more. Again, it is in the Northern Rio Grande, a Northern Tiwa speaking village. The only other Northern Tiwa speaking village, of course, is Taos Pueblo. And in the inset map on the right, you can see the location of the places that I'll be talking about, particularly Picuris Pueblo to the south, Pot Creek Pueblo, an ancestral home of Picuris Pueblo, and of course, the World Heritage site of Taos Pueblo in the Northern Rio Grande. Nice fuzzy picture taken in 1961 by a person I'll be talking about during this talk, Herbert Dick. An overview looking north toward Taos Pueblo, which is about 20 miles away on the other side of that mountain range. What you're looking at here in very fuzzy view is the church, as you can see, sort of right center, and the white building. And then toward the back, a very large mound, a sage-covered mound, where the old village of Picuris is. Again, Herbert Dick, as I'll show you, is the archaeologist that really started the archaeology at Picuris Pueblo and did a really amazing work there. Long before Herbert Dick, though, the first recorded interaction between colonists and the Picuris people involved Castaño de Sosa, who showed up with a small group of soldiers in January 1591. And I love this historical account because it's a beautifully ironic non-event coming up through belly-high snow on horses. Castaño de Sosa and his compatriots came up to a set of buildings that they describe as 8 to 9 stories tall, which is pretty astounding. I think it's probably the geographic setting made it look that way, but these were multi-story adobe structures that were very imposing. No one came out to see this visitor and his group. Only one man looked at them, went back in the Pueblo, closed the gate, and Castaño de Sosa stayed in huts near the Pueblo, probably the same places where visiting Jicarilla Apache and others stayed during exchange fairs. And in the morning when he got up to make contact, he saw those huge structures teeming with people, all of whom had rocks and bows and arrows and all manner of weapons. And he did the smart thing, turned around, went back to Santa Fe. 300 years later, A.C. Vroman, one of the famous photographers in the turn of the century in the Southwest, came to Picuris and took this really stunning photograph of the remains of at least 3 stories of architecture in the old village. To the right, you see the roundhouse, which still stands and is still used today. But at the turn of the early 20th century, these structures were still standing, probably having stood there for a couple hundred years before even de Sosa showed up. And what Herbert Dick saw in 1961, when he started working at Picuris Pueblo, was some of the most astounding archaeological deposits you'll see anywhere in the Southwest. The old village of Picuris truly is a tell. It's a human-created hill created by generation after generation of construction, adobe melt, reconstruction, and 16 feet of stratified deposits in his first test pit before he hit sterile soil. And you can see the date ranges based on pottery that he's put on the wall there. The earliest materials at Picuris were not found in this pit. They were found elsewhere, and they date at least back to the 10th century CE based on pottery types and based on some work that Seb Fowles is doing right now, possibly even earlier. Herb Dick had got his experiences in doing Northern Tiwa Pueblo archaeology at our campus, now called SMU in Taos, then called Fort Bergwin, working with Fred Wendorf and Ron Wetherington in the late 50s. And so being very familiar with the material record of this area, when Herb Dick visited Picuris Pueblo in the late 50s, he realized that based on the surface materials, he was looking at a continuous occupation going back well over 1,000 years. So he put together really an amazing multidisciplinary project that NSF funded in 1961. And this had other goals. Herb Dick realized there was a great need for employment. So he used this project to employ a number of the tribal members to assist with the excavations. And people, the elders today who worked with Herb Dick still remember working, screening, digging with Herb Dick, who is still referred to as Dr. Dick in honorary terms at the Pueblo. This is the most extensively excavated living Pueblo community in the Southwest. What you see here are part of the over 100 surface rooms that were excavated in completely excavated or partially excavated. Lots and lots of test pits not shown here, and 14 kivas that were partially or entirely excavated. And that sinuous trench that you see coming down from upper left to the center is actually a trench put in 1965 when the first water line to supply fresh water to the Pueblo was put in. And Herb Dick excavated every other 5-foot segment by hand. This is a 1,620-foot long stratigraphy trench through the Pueblo. We are still working through materials from these excavations. It is truly an overwhelming amount of information that Herb Dick and his colleagues collected. The excavation strategies were normal for the time. Entire rooms were excavated. They were not sampled. They were completely excavated down to floors and sometimes through the floors to subfloor them. This is what's called the Castillo or Old Castle of Picuris, approximately 1450 CE. And one of the reasons for maximal excavation and exposure is not only was Herb Dick trying to assist with employment, but he was trying to make tourism a very real thing at Picuris. And so part of the goal was to excavate as much as possible, leave it open for people to see as visitors. And 10 years later, he was instrumental in getting a museum built at Picuris. One of the things that's interesting in reading the field notes, which there were thousands of pages, is that Herb Dick did excavate sacred spaces, kivas, subterranean kivas at Picuris Pueblo. And he does mention once in a while, talking to the cacique, the spiritual leader, about some of the sensitivities and some of the unease of some of the community members excavating kivas. But in each case, Herb Dick was given permission to excavate kivas, and there's really no record of these discussions, negotiations between the archaeologists and the leaders of Picuris Pueblo. But part of all, or all of 14 kivas were excavated, and here you see Herb Dick watching the excavation of one of the kivas at Picuris Pueblo. And as I'll mention later on, the preservation of these kivas is really outstanding. This is one roof of one of the kivas, the roof having collapsed into the fill of the kiva. Fortunately, Herb Dick did take tree ring dates from many of these structures, and so we do have a limited but still informative dendrochronological record of construction and construction episodes at Picuris Pueblo. Little known to many people outside of this area, Picuris has the northernmost mural art in the Southwest. 3 of the kivas he excavated down to the floor had painted murals. Here you see Helen Crotty's depictions of these from her article or chapter in the 1999 summary of some of the research at Picuris Pueblo. And as you can see, an amazing array of polychrome designs, including birds, one possible animal over to the left on the upper panel, terraces that some interpret as cumulus clouds, others see as actual sort of icons of the village structures themselves, lightning, corn plants, birds of different colors, no humans, no kachinas, no masked figures. The 5 years of very intense archaeological work has produced one of the truly amazing archaeological resources and patrimonies of a Pueblo community in the Southwest. Over 900,000 ceramic artifacts, all of which were classified, typed by Herb Dick and his assistants. 40 to 50,000 stone artifacts, thousands of bone artifacts, thousands of pages of field notes and maps and inventories. And yes, human remains were encountered. They have been repatriated to Picuris Pueblo. One of the artifacts, let me say, of Herb Dick's excavations and analysis is the Y9 card. This Herb Dick referred to as the poor man's IBM. These were cards that were used to codify data on important artifacts. Not every artifact obviously had a Y9 card, but they're pretty brilliant if you think about them. What they are is they're a punch card, and each one of these segments here you see was a field of data. And each one of these holes, there's a 1, a 2, a 4, and a 7. 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 4 is 7, plus 7 is 14. Each of these, based on how they're punched, can codify basically 14 bits of data. And you see here one, this is an Adler tool. These 3, 7, 4, and 2 have been punched. And that sum of 13 means something. It means an Adler tool. And so the way these things work, these are not optically scanned like IBM cards. Instead, and here's the sample of over 10,000 of the Y9 cards that Herb Dick created in the latter years of his project. The way these things work is you stick a needle through these holes, and then you shake that stack of cards, and whatever falls out, whatever has been punched, has that data, is positive for that data. So it's a way, again, of manually classifying and then manually organizing data. We have spent a couple of years optically scanning them and trying to make them into IBM cards. And we are now in the latter stages of computerizing all of this data, so it will be digital. Again, well over 10,000 artifacts from the Picuris collections, now part of the legacy data collection. What have we been trying to do with these data? Well, what archaeologists do with archaeologically recovered materials: answer questions that are pertinent to our studies. Now, let me pause for a second and emphasize that this is not how the Picuris Archaeological Project that Seb and Lindsay and I have been privileged to be part of the past several years works. All of our questions have come from the community. And one of the questions that the community had is how many people were here. They've heard various estimates in the past. And so one of the things that we've been working on is using our methodologies in archaeology to try and answer this question for the community itself. What we've done, you've used a Bayesian analysis that Scott Artman and others have perfected to come up with an estimate of, this is the probability of occupation. And basically it's a summation of pottery types that are classified as to certain time periods. And through this manipulation of the data, through this Bayesian analysis, you come up with essentially what is a proxy for population. It is not an absolute number. It is a relative amount of pottery from certain time periods, and an assessment of how likely it is people were at a site during a certain time period. And I've drawn this really ugly red curve to indicate what I think are the trends here, which is initial village occupation, probably in the 9th or 10th century. and then slow population growth up until the 13th century, when you see a large influx of people, indicated again by pottery counts, and then the peak around 1500 CE or AD, where we think, again, 2,500 to 3,000 people lived at Picuris Pueblo. And then, as I'll get into later, the absolutely devastating, precipitous drop in population starting in around 1600 AD and culminating by 1700 AD with nearly 90% of the Picuris, previous Picuris population perished. We've been using remote sensing to try and figure out where structures were. Again, this was a massive adobe building. Had it been masonry, like we're graced with in the Mesa Verde area, it would have been a lot easier to figure out population, but these villages melt, and this is what we're left with. The colors here are areas that are poor in clay content. They hold less moisture. Red and yellow means clay, which means adobe. So we are slowly coming up with what we believe to be a pretty accurate depiction of how large this place was, and it was large. The second real thrust of our research most recently has been a focus on the agricultural landscape that Picuris ancestral populations created across this area, the Hidden Valley, as they call their home. And as I'm going to show you, again, this question, what were our farming practices? Where did we produce food? Is a very important question to Picuris. Everyone who lives at Picuris knows about these features out in the woods, but have wondered how extensive these field features were. What were they used for? When were they built? And so we have been looking at this for Picuris Pueblo and doing very fine scale mapping. And here you see just one view through part of the mesa near Picuris Pueblo. And those lines of boulders are linear alignments of large and small rocks that have been moved into place to create linear features as well as grid features that cover hundreds and hundreds of hectares at Picuris Pueblo. Is this resilient practice? These are questions that obviously we will be looking at in the future. But at this point, what we're doing is trying simply to do our best for the community to answer those questions about what is out there. These rock alignments cover nearly 1,000 hectares. Again, a hectare is about 2.4 acres. So 1,000 hectares of fields across the mesa tops. Crow Canyon campus, 69 hectares, just to give you a frame of reference for how extensive these features are. In 2021, we started mapping these things with very precise surveying instruments. And here you see the results of just 40 hectares of coverage. These are real rock alignments and grids and alignments of various sizes and widths. This single season, recording these 40 hectares, the linear length of all these features added up is 27 kilometers. So amazing, huge amounts of effort put into this agriscape of Picuris Pueblo. Picuris, by the way, is located off to the upper left. This is to the south and east of Picuris Pueblo proper. This is the Eagle Pile site area that we have been working in. That big cleared area is a 1930s airstrip that was put in, we believe, by a lumber company so they could fly people in and out of their lumber holdings. And what you see in snow there are ancestral trails and raceways that Picuris has used over the past millennium for their rituals and doings. Unfortunately, the lines aren't as clear here, but in 21 and 22, here is the extent of these features. And again, these are really astounding engineered features. They follow contours. There are grids where water can be trapped. There are alignments where water can be diverted. So this is a mesa top that has been terrascaped to collect, retain, and utilize moisture, both snow and rain, to again, be productive agriculturally. Again, this map Seb Fowles put together. It's not just the mesa tops, folks. It's not just these hundreds of hectares of linear features. When you get onto the steeper slopes surrounding the mesas, what you find are hectares and hectares of terraces. These have been created by cutting into the slope, pulling rock and soil out, and basically creating surfaces that then can trap water and be used, we surmise, for our agricultural productivity. These terraces are still working today, folks. This is, you can see the pinyon and juniper growing in these sediment traps that even after centuries are still working. We have been graced to have the expertise of Jesse Casana and Carolyn Ferwerda from Dartmouth College, two amazing remote sensing experts. One of their students, John Alperstein, behind them there. And they have been coming out now for 2 years to assist with LiDAR mapping of these features, particularly the terraces. The terraces show up much more easily than these stone alignments, which we are still using these very labor-intensive techniques to record. But just to give you an idea of the extent of these, behind Carolyn off to the west, there is an area that we flew in 2022. And this is one area, one single flight. Every one of those wrinkles that you see on those hillsides is terrace. Hectares and hectares of labor-intensive terraces. Here's a closer view, and you can see how these beautifully follow contours. It's curious that these are on north-facing slopes. We tend to think of south-facing slopes as where you would grow crops because of the solar radiation. These tend to be north and east-facing. And here, just to emphasize, are the grids and the terraces that we recorded in 2022 in just 3 hectare areas. On the left, you can see that's a 100-meter scale. This year, we added to these areas. We have not presented the data to Picuris, and so it won't be presented here until we have presented it to the community. But these are the areas that 2021 through 23 we have covered. Tribal lands cover over 7,000 hectares. We have covered about 1.3% of the tribal lands. So back to this concept now of resilience. We all know systems don't react to risks and perturbations. Social systems are made up of people, they're made up of groups. People react. And so one of the things that we are looking into, not only for our own knowledge, but also for the community of Picuris, is their agricultural practices and, if you will, how they fit into these concepts of resilience. What we are recording and what we will be recording for years are very extensive agrarian landscapes using the cobbles from these glacial till deposits to create alignments, and on the hillsides, these really astounding terrace complexes. We believe, and we think that we can well show that the very large population of Picuris, again, 3,000 people is pretty large for an ancestral Pueblo. these folks were not only farming for their own needs, but we believe this hyper terrascaped landscape was being used to produce surplus for exchange with other groups, particularly those to the east out on the Great Plains. Picuris was part of the Plains Pueblo interaction sphere, where materials from the Northern Rio Grande, agrarian materials, obsidian, would move with people out onto the plains, and in return, bison and bison hides and resources from the plains would be moving into the Rio Grande. And to do this, we think that Picuris was overproducing to be a major player in this system. So I think we see resilience manifested as the expansion of agrarian activity and diversification of their economy. We know diversification, we know these sorts of things do engender more stability, more resilience in complex adaptive systems. And so we are trying this on to see how it works from a resilience standpoint. But now let me turn to transilience. And again, an idea, concept that I think really allows us more traction in what we're trying to explain with ancestral and ethnohistoric and modern Pueblo strategies for dealing with change and turbulence and upheaval. I want to take you now to Picuris Pueblo, 10 miles by air over the mountain from Picuris Pueblo, a recognized ancestral home of Picuris people and the Picuris community, and a site that has been investigated since the 1950s and is on our SMU and Taos campus and a focus of a lot of research over the past 70 years. Now, not all ancestral communities have proved to be as long-lived, and I would say none are as long-lived as Picuris Pueblo, that's been occupied for well over 1,100 years. But at Picuris Pueblo, I think that what we can see are some of these strategies and acts to support, foster, and ensure safe transitions in place, in status, in spiritual health, in well-being of the living, the ancestors, and those who are yet to come into this world. Transilience actually comes from geology. It refers to abrupt change or variation in a geologic formation, but I use it to typify, to describe acts, strategies that provide transition, that provide avenues through turbulence, through change, through traumas, through upheavals. This image was created by Sev Fowles for his dissertation, 2004, and it shows what Picuris Pueblo would have looked like in the early 1300s, so the early 14th century, shortly before it was depopulated. And what you see are multi-story structures, great kiva, small kivas, plazas, all nestled in this area, about 5 acres in size. The ground plan of Picuris Pueblo, again, we think we have found all of the rooms. Like Picuris, like Taos Pueblo, this is an entirely adobe structure. It melted in the early 14th century, leaving the remains of a very vibrant and very short-lived occupation. Only about 60 years, we think, the occupation of Picuris Pueblo. But in those 60 years, nearly 500 rooms being built, rebuilt, and overbuilt. Open plaza areas, small and large kivas. You see in the lower right a large kiva that I always get in trouble for calling a great kiva because I know Jeff Boyer, great kivas don't belong in the Rio Grande, but we'll just call it a large great kiva. Transilient acts at Picuris Pueblo. What we see associated with the final occupation and the final depopulation of Picuris Pueblo in about 1320 is a set of very extensive, very intensive burning events at Picuris Pueblo. It's a perplexing pattern in some ways because nearly all of these rooms that we have investigated that have evidence of burning are cleaned out. Really, the only things left in these rooms are offerings, I believe, to call them, of corn and other materials left purposefully on the floors of these structures. The red dots with black outlines are those rooms that had corn on the floor before and during the destruction of these rooms with fire. And kivas also across the village were also purposefully burned. I could get into the research as why we call this purposeful burning. We can wait for another time. Here you have where fires were set at Picuris Pueblo. And I would argue that these are transilient acts that, that due to a set of circumstances that we're still trying to understand, the decision was made that Picuris Pueblo was no longer a viable place to live, perhaps internal divisions, internal arguments. Decisions were made that this place was no longer habitable for any number of reasons, and decisions were made to burn this set of rooms with offerings in them. We see in the 5 kivas, small kivas that were excavated, these were prepared for closure. Hearths were mudded shut, spirit holes in the walls were mudded shut, and in this case, 2 deer skulls were placed on the clay-sealed hearth before the structure was burned, one pointing north and the other facing south. This, I think, set of strategies to leave a place in a safe manner, in a way that would protect the ancestors, would protect the important spaces that had been made, used, and then closed. Burning was used in many of these places. One of the places that Sev Fowles excavated for his doctoral work that was incredibly illuminating was actually not burned, and was really seminal to his explanation of what gave rise to Picuris Pueblo, which was the joining of groups, some of whom were not local, some of whom likely were local. And on the floor of room 822, which in essence turned out to be an above ground D-shaped kiva, complete with a ventilator system there on the east side. Before that structure was decommissioned, was closed, clusters of materials were laid on the floor that Sev very carefully and beautifully excavated and interpreted. On the north quadrant there of the room were tools, technologies, and skeletal remains of animals, of activities that would be essentially associated with hunting. And on the south, plant remains, agricultural tools, all associated again with growing food. Again, Sev has written extensively about this. I'll leave you to read about it in his explanations. But essentially, he argues, and he's absolutely spot on, that this is the emplacement of the origin traditions of the Northern Tiwa people on the floor of the structure. The people at Taos Pueblo, people at Picuris Pueblo, their traditions hold that their origins come from the north, people who were hunters, as well as from the south, people who were agrarian, meeting in the Taos area, living together, sometimes fighting, sometimes having massive conflicts, most of the time getting along. And so when this structure was again put to rest, that story, the story that is still being told at both Taos and Picuris, was put on the floor. These transilient acts, these behaviors, acts, doings, again, I think are largely transitional and transition allowing activities that provide safe haven and safe travel and safe future for those people who are using these and then ultimately not using these. At Picuris Pueblo, of the 13 kivas excavated, only one was burned. And when Herb Dick excavated that room, Kiva D, a subterranean structure, he was told by the cacique that that was known as the Cochiti Witch Kiva, and that it had a history that involved it being defiled in some way by someone from outside the community, and it had to be put to rest through burning, which again is not arson in the sense of purposeful destruction for any pleasure or any disrespect. In fact, this burning is meant to protect those spaces and protect the people who'd been in contact with those spaces, and to cleanse them so that any of the anima that perhaps were still present in those spaces would be laid to rest. Here you see on the right, lower right, one of the spirit holes, the niches in the wall of the Cochiti Witch Kiva that had been mudded shut. So this was hermetically sealed. This was then burned, again, for protective purposes. Other Transilient acts Herb Dick excavated evidence of at Picuris were at least 2 caches, or I would call them interments, of ritual items, most likely in the floor of a society room. And you can see here the range of materials that were laid to rest, including sacred flutes, small miniature jars that at least historically were still used in kivas to hold water from the sacred directions, and a female figurine in the bottom layer of this pit. These, I think, are interpreted not only by us, but as the descendants of the people who created these caches, as places where important society paraphernalia, tools, symbols were laid to rest, so that their use had ended, and they needed to be put in a place that kept them out of not only harm's way, but harming others who may not know how to use them. So can a community be resilient? I know it's a big jump, folks, but I'm getting close to my time. Can a community be resilient? The reason I ask you this is this. I've often been, in telling people about Picuris and describing this amazing community, been told, what an amazingly resilient place, what an amazingly resilient community. Well, if resilience is staying in one place a long time, yes. But if resilience is weathering 90% loss of population, here you have the smallpox epidemics in northern New Spain that REF documented very clearly, coordinating with the drop in population, and the green line, 1698, after the failed Pueblo revolt, 84 women and children who were heading for Cuartalejo in Kansas to try and get out of the way of the Spanish were captured and sold off as slaves. So resilient, you decide. This is where the resilient being good casts a long shadow on what actually is the history. So resilience is a possible outcome. Transilience, I think we can understand as these trusted practices to contend with change, to contend with upheaval and trauma. And what I'm really interested in, and again, what I've been working with Picuris on, is I think that we can scale these. So who was burning the houses at Picuris Pueblo? These were households, but these were households part of a community that had made a group decision. Burn kivas, again, larger kin groups, not just households, making decisions about how to treat their spaces now that departure was imminent. Interment of ritual assemblages like the interments at Picuris Pueblo. Transilient acts to ensure safety of those who might encounter the items, loss of those trained to utilize them and part of a ritual group. Deposition of tradition-related ritual materials on room floors, again, associated with ritual groups. So I have run long. There is more. but I want to check in with my shepherds to see if we want to just go to questions.
Well, you've got about 6 minutes, and we don't really have a ton of questions. There was one about kind of restating and reviewing your definition of transilience, but I think you just did that. Oh, and we have some comments that say, please go on. This is amazing. So
Okay.
why don't you just keep going?
I will
Maybe
keep
another 5
going.
minutes.
This
Okay.
is where I start getting into some flights of fancy.
Okay.
Maybe not so fanciful. One of the things that has fascinated archaeologists, anthropologists across the Southwest is how are the historic and ethnohistoric pueblos organized. And one of the grand trends that has been talked about for a century in the Southwest anthropologically is the decline, if you will, the change in overall social organization of communities from west to east, where the farthest west among Hopi, you have clan-based kin group organization being the predominant organizational strategy. But as you go through the Caris and Pueblos and into the Rio Grande, what you see is the loss and the de-emphasis of these kin group organizations. And you have much more emphasis on sodalities, again, kin-based organizational systems, and then moieties, dual organization, where villages, communities are overall divided in half. You're either a North person or a South person. You're either a squash person or a turquoise person. So in looking at Taos and Picuris and Picuris Pueblo, the question I've come up with, others have come up with, is this always been the case? Sev Fowles, again, has eloquently, historically traced the creation, if you will, the adoption of moiety organization of Picuris Pueblo. And he made the argument that as you have disparate groups coming together with different histories, you have essentially the raw material for moieties. And it's the historical foundation of that coming together that is the basis for moieties. Moore and Boyer have argued that moieties are more scalar related, that when you get too many people, you need to divide them in half because decision-making becomes unwieldy. And so this is an organizational strategy. Are those two mutually exclusive? I don't think so. Is one more important than the other? We don't know. But again, these are questions about how people were organized. And at Picuris Pueblo, as Jeff Boyer's pointed out in a lot of his research in the Taos area, great kivas aren't part of the overall Northern Tiwa archaeological repertoire. But at the bitter end of Picuris Pueblo's occupation, at least based on this one great kiva down here in the southeastern part of the site, you have the construction of a structure that doesn't belong in this area. And this also has the latest cutting date, 1319 AD, of any structure on the site. Up here is a large plaza with remote sensing, as shown a very large pit structure. And then the structure I mentioned that Sev excavated, room 822, a D-shaped kiva that doesn't belong here. The closest analog to this structure is down in, the analogs are down in the Tewa Basin, Española and Santa Fe, and out toward Pecos Pueblo. So perhaps what may have happened at Picuris Pueblo with the influx of migrants, which Sev again has beautifully shown in the archaeological record, was this influx including people with different organizational systems that may not have been kin-based, but perhaps moiety-based. And perhaps this was not a fit for Picuris Pueblo, which was a multi-ethnic village of autochthonous ancestral Tiwa peoples from the south and peoples from the south with perhaps a different system for celebrating the sacred. So in other words, perhaps kin and moiety clashed at Picuris Pueblo. And given the potential for that tension, for that potential trauma, the decision was made. It was not a place that should be occupied. I contend that there was a shared understanding despite this model of conflict. And again, I say this was conflict that was resolved through transilient acts rather than violence, because nowhere in the archaeological record at Picuris Pueblo do we find evidence of warfare, of raiding, of traumatic deaths associated with the burning of the site. I think there's a shared understanding of what needs to be done when lived space, places still occupied by ancestors, are left. You leave with protection, with respect, with continued sustenance. You leave with transilient acts. Picuris. There are some really enticing patterns here that when you look at the distribution of the earliest pottery types at the site, the earliest, most abundant, that being Santa Fe black on white from the 13th century, it clusters in two areas. And Herb Dick clearly defined this when he was excavating at the site. Is this the historical foundation of the North and South Side moiety organization that is found at Picuris Pueblo? There are seasonal societies that are within this moiety organization that are seasonally based. The participation is not based on kin, on family-based relationships. Again, these are non-kin sodalities. So is this a foundation perhaps of moiety organization at Picuris Pueblo? Here you see, even historically, two kivas being used even up until the 20th century. North side kiva, again, placed right in where you have the earliest occupation. South side sky kiva, placed where you have the earliest occupation, again, mirroring that in the modern day Scalp House Plaza. I'm going to skip that, but I'll get this. There's also a very curious pattern, interesting pattern, that you have paired kivas at Picuris. Is this another aspect of dual organization whereby these smaller multi-household kivas are pairing up because they are complementary pairs, one north, one south? Again, Richard Mermejo, our guide and liaison this past summer, expressed that by saying these are related kivas of the two groups at Picuris. I thank you all for your patience. Again, primarily my thanks to Picuris Pueblo, to Sev, to Lindsay, to Richard Mermejo, and the host of institutions and people who have been so instrumental in allowing us to have this privileged look into Northern Tiwa ancestry. Thanks all.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was spectacular. Still kind of taking it all in, and lots of compliments in the chat for you. I'm only going to ask one question since we're 3 minutes over, because someone wondered if they wanted to know more. Could you recommend one or two publications to read?
So in 1999, Herb Dick had passed away, sadly, and I put together a publication right here. You can't read it. It's 8 centuries, Picuris Pueblo through time, 8 centuries of change in a Northern Rio Grande Pueblo. Google it, it's free. It's on the website of the Clements Center for Southwest Studies at SMU. And we have made it free in a big PDF file, including color kiva mural pictures. So look for it and read it.
That is so great. 8 centuries of change at Picuris Pueblo. So wonderful. And thanks for making it free. We are big on open source here at Crow Canyon Archaeological Center. So
absolutely.
Well, thank you. And thank you for giving us a little extra, and come visit, and we won't make your wife clean anything. In fact, we will take really good care of her. So
thank you very much. And again, thank you, Crow Canyon, for starting me on my journey. I feel like I have followed the ancestral pueblos from the Mesa Verde area to the Rio Grande, and been privileged to be allowed to be part of their communities.
That's wonderful. Perfect migration. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you all.